Hello YouTube, this is Goddard Radio Moscow here again with another beer review for you today. I'm reporting again from Heidelberg in Baden-Württemberg in Germany, so I'm going to continue on with my German series of beer reviews. As I mentioned before, this will be a mix of the sort of really small breweries and some of the better known German ones for you today, and it's one of the latter that I have for you to review today. You'll probably have heard of the Paulaner Brauerei from Munich, or München as the Germans will call it, but today we're going to have a look at one of their Hefeweissbiers, this one being the Dunkel. And I actually can't quite remember whether we get this particular variety at home. So as you can see, there's the bottle there, Hefeweissbier Dunkel. And I've already reviewed for you actually the Münchner Hellesbier, so you'll find the link to my other Paulaner reviews in the video description there. It's done in such a way so that when I add more of them later on, you'll be able to see all of them there. So click on that if you are interested. But as is usual with my beer reviews, I'll just take you through a brief history of the brewery as I like to do. But as I always mention, if you are simply just interested in the tasting of this beer, then feel free to go on towards the latter half of the video and you will catch that particular segment. But anyway, Paulaner, the name Paulaner is obtained from the Italian monastic order of Paolo, and these guys settled in the heart of Munich in the early 17th century. Now in 1634 the order of Paulaner began brewing beer in the Al district, which proved to be the foundation stone for the Paulaner brewery as it is today. But apparently the monks were forced to fast on only bread and water during the Lenten period, and they reasoned that beer could be produced as a liquid bread and thus they wouldn't break their Lenten promise. It sounds quite an interesting idea, that actually. But this liquid bread beer became the world's first Doppelbock, known today as the Paulaner Salvator, and I actually found a bottle of this in my local Rewe the other day, so I'm looking forward to reviewing that for you in the coming weeks as well, the world's first Doppelbock. But the monks sold this beer to the population of Munich for a small charge, and it actually spread very quickly, much to the alarm of the secular brewers within the city. But the letter of protest from these secular brewers in 1634 is actually deemed to be the first recognition of the brewery's existence, and the aim of it was to essentially prevent the public sale of the Paulaner beer. And you can see on the bottle here you have the year 1634 just to mark that occasion. But the monks actually only in fact received their unlimited right of sale from the electoral prince 150 years later, so you're talking about 1785 roughly. But because of this event, the first mug of the strong beer every year is given to the political leader of Bavaria, and this is known as the Salvator Probe, which means Salvator tasting essentially, if you like. But this ceremony also marks the beginning of the Lenten period. Now the Paulaner beers are obviously brewed in accordance with the Bavarian Purity Law of 1516, the oldest food law in the world, and it only permits malt, hops, water and yeast in brewing. As I mentioned before, German beer brewing is largely a process-based thing as opposed to Belgian where it's more ingredient-based. But because of this, Paulaner say that they use only the best summer barley with the best viability values, starch and protein content, and the best aromatic hops from the Hallertau region. This is a region in Bavaria listed as the largest continuous hop planing area in the world, and they also used untouched glacier water from a depth of 240 meters, and they also have their own exclusive yeast cultivation which is practically pure and produced in a unique yeast propagation system, so you get some unique tastes out of these Paulaner beers here. But as I've mentioned before in the last review I did, Paulaner are actually one of the 6 breweries who provide the Oktoberfest beer for the famous Oktoberfest in Munich dating back from 1810, and today they're actually the largest brewery in Bavaria and the 8th best-selling brewery in all of Germany, and the company actually belongs to the Brauholding International AG BHI group, which is actually owned by Heineken. So this is a subsidiary of Heineken, this beer. But it's quite cool with the German breweries, they always seem to maintain their independence to some degree, and even when they become part of the big conglomerates, if you like, they're usually left to their process because they're very old breweries here in Germany, of course. But to tell you a little bit about the other Paulaner beers that you can get, you can obviously get the Münchner Helles, which is one I've reviewed for you already, Original Münchner Dunkel Lager, Lichte, which is a light beer, Dunkel Naturtrüb Hefeweizen, which is this one here, the Salvator, which as I mentioned is the world's first Doppelbock, Haus Original and Premium Pils, both of which are Pils beers. They have Keller beer and Nocheberger, which are both obviously Keller beers, unfiltered lager sort of beers, Oktoberfest Weizen, and also the regular Märzen beer, which are both, these two are both Märzen style beers. But let's get on to the tasting of this guy itself. I'll just let you have a little look at the bottle and cap of this one here, as I always do. So you can see the label there, just I'll move out a little bit. You can see the sort of Bavarian women here with their big tray of different beers. Those are actually Hefeweizen glasses there, so it's a nice little touch there on the bottle, and you can see the sort of Munich background with the trees there, a sort of traditional German beer hall if you like, and there's the sort of logo of the Paulaner monks there, and as I mentioned before, there's the year 1634, where this was the letter of complaint from the secular breweries in Munich, of course, when the first official acknowledgement of the existence of the Paulaner brew, and you can see the sort of top label there, and this is the standard Paulaner bottle cap, if you like. This is the same for all their different beers here, and it is just that Paulaner symbol, as I mentioned there before. So let's get on to the tasting of this one here. This is a 5.3% Dunkel Weissbier. So let's get this guy out and actually get on with the tasting here. I looked up the hop profile of this beer for you, but it wasn't available on the Paulaner website, but you will find that in the video description there, so you can have a look at that if you are particularly interested in that beer. As you can see, there's a good bit of smoke on the opening of this beer here, so let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting here. Quite looking forward to giving this guy a try. I just need to watch I don't get too much head on it to begin with. These German beers can kind of get a bit crazy when it comes to the head of the beer. The Germans, as I've mentioned, a lot of time they don't drink their beer unless it's got a massive foamy head on it, and this is how the Germans like their beer. But what I'll do for you is I'll get it up to here, and then I'll put the last little bit in where the sediment will be, and we'll give it sort of two tastes, if you like. This is a good practice to do with the German beers. But as you can see, it's definitely a sort of cloudy chestnutty colour. I can't see through that at all if I put my fingers in front of it. You've got a sort of 2.5 finger head there. It's off-white. I can't really see much in the way of carbonation there actually, but I think that's just because it's so cloudy, if you like. In terms of the aroma for this one, smells like a typical sort of Hefeweizen, if you like, as you would expect. It's got the nice sort of banana and bready aromas, but it's actually got a bit of a sort of herbal hop aroma to it as well at the same time. So it's quite interesting in that way. There's maybe a sort of little bit of a kind of tropical fruit to it as well, which is a little bit unusual, I have to say. But it's got a nice bit of sort of roasted caramel malt as well, and as I say, the banana and bready aromas are what you would expect from a Hefeweizen. In the case of the Dunkel, you always expect a little bit of sort of caramel and roasted malts in there as well. This head on the top of this one's actually becoming quite chunky, and it's breaking up quite well actually. A big chunky head on this one here. But yeah, definitely you've got that banana and sort of bready aromas as you would expect, a nice bit of roasted caramel malt, all of which you would expect from the Dunkel Hefeweizen style. But there's a bit of herbal character in there and a little bit of sort of tart fruit, I would say, with this one. A little bit of an unusual touch actually, but it should definitely be quite an interesting beer to try. But let's get on with the tasting of this guy and see how we do. It's very sweet up front actually. But the bready malts in the middle, they're actually a little bit darker, which is what you would expect, of course, from the Dunkel Hefeweizen. They've got the caramel mixed in quite well, but it does have a little bit of acidity up front. It's got quite a sort of soury acidity taste up front, which is quite interesting, and then it gives way to the sort of bready malts with the kind of banana and the sort of caramel, roasted caramel elements that you would expect. But it's got some kind of, once you get over the bready malts into the back end of them, you're getting some sort of nice cereal flavour to it as well. It comes in with that acidity, which I'm not too keen on, but the bready malts in the middle are sort of well mixed in with this little cereal element there, and you've got the nice banana and clovey flavours mixed in just with a little bit of cereal after. But the flavour actually ends quite abruptly with this one. But yeah, it's quite an interesting one that the flavour actually ends quite abruptly, but I'll put the last little bit in and just see how that affects it. This will obviously be the sediment, maybe little bits of yeast and things like that in there. Maybe we'll get a little bit more taste out of it this way. That's making it last a little bit longer, I would say. In a way, putting in that little bit of sediment, it's almost numbed the acidic character that comes in at the start. It makes the bready malts last just a little bit more, and then the cereals are coming out just a little bit better as well. So you must have a bit of yeast mixed in with the cereals there, I would say. But this is an interesting Dunkel, or Hefeweizen Dunkel, of course. But yeah, definitely you're getting the sort of acidity coming in up front, then it's giving way to the sort of banana and bready and caramel flavours that you would expect of the Dunkel Hefeweizen. And these are giving way just to a little bit of a sort of cereal flavour, and it's really nicely, that middle part of the beer is really nice. I'm not so keen on the sort of acidic start, if you like, but the flavour without the sediment, if you like, does end quite quickly. But when you put the sediment into it, it actually lasts a little bit longer. But yeah, in terms of the mouthfeel of this one, I would say it's actually slightly oily, which is, in my experience, is a little bit unusual for the Hefeweizens actually. This one's a bit more, the oily flavour in this is quite an unusual one. It makes it a little bit syrupy. I would describe it as maybe mid to full bodied, but it's not the heaviest Hefeweizen I've had actually. It's a little bit more drinkable than some of them, but it's definitely a little bit more oily, but it is quite watery at the same time, if that makes sense. It has a little bit of a syrupy character, but it is fairly easy drinking. It's not too heavy. I would say this one maybe is more of a tasting beer, but it's going for, it seems almost as if it's going for the idea of being a more sessionable one. And obviously when these guys are producing Oktoberfest beer, it is a sort of idea that you want a more sessionable beer, and it does feel as if it's going for that, of course. And the carbonation as well is actually quite sharp, and I think that brings out that sort of acidic character at the start that I was talking about a little bit. But it is a little bit syrupy. I would say it's sort of mid to full bodied, but it is a little bit more drinkable and less heavy than you would normally expect from this style. But it's quite an interesting one, and of course it is from one of the most well-known brewers in Germany, who are well known for making quality beer here. So I mean, I would recommend that you give this a try. I would say, in my personal experience, I've had some better Dunkel Hefeweizens, of course. But you know, Paulaner, you probably won't be, if you like German beer, you won't be disappointed by any of their things. I would say give this beer a try and see what you think of it yourself. And you know, please let me know in the comments section your own thoughts on this beer. I always like hearing these. But I hope you've enjoyed this beer review and found it informative. As I say, this is an interesting Dunkel Hefeweizen from one of Germany's best known breweries. I personally think there probably are a few Dunkel Hefeweizens you can get that could maybe outdo this one, and of course this is a fairly big brewery in Germany these days, but as we all know, craft beer is usually better than the mass-produced stuff. I'm not sure exactly what scale this is produced on right enough, but who knows. But I hope you found this beer review informative anyway. As I mentioned, please let me know in the comments section your own thoughts on this beer if you have tried it. It's always interesting to get other people's perspectives on the beer. If you've enjoyed this beer review, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks again for watching my beer reviews. As I say, like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff you've been watching. Goddard Radio Moscow, and I'll be back soon with another beer review. Cheers.